The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, drumming against the warped wooden shutters of Cordelia's rented room like fingers tapping out a funeral march. She lay in the narrow bed, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly, and stared at the water-stained ceiling while fragments of nightmare dissolved behind her eyes. The same dream always. A masked man in enemy colors, the sharp bite of something slipped into her wine, and then darkness punctuated by sensations she could not quite grasp. She never saw his face clearly, never remembered what happened after the darkness took her. But sometimes, beneath the layers of confusion, she caught a whisper of familiarity, cedar and ink, a scent that tugged at memories she could not reach. 8 months pregnant now, and still the full truth would not come. Cordelia pushed herself upright, wincing as her back protested the movement. The room above the Salted Anchor Tavern was cramped and cold, reeking of the fish that sustained this village and everyone in it. 6 weeks she had been here, the fourth village since her exile began. The first 3 had recognized her, or grown suspicious, or simply had no work for a pregnant Omega with no pack. She had learned to move on before the whispers turned to stones. She caught her reflection in the spotted mirror propped against the wall. Gray eyes, hollow now from months of poor sleep and poorer nutrition. Dark auburn hair hanging lank past her shoulders, no longer the glossy waves she had once maintained with such care. Cheekbones too sharp, jaw too tight, the face of a woman who had learned that expecting kindness was the first step toward disappointment. And beneath her rough wool dress, the undeniable curve of her pregnancy, the child of her violation, or so she believed. The monster's heir growing in her womb. Her wolf stirred restlessly, the way it always did when she thought about the pregnancy. An agitation she could not interpret, a protest against the story her conscious mind had accepted. Her wolf had never believed the narrative, but Cordelia had learned to ignore its objections. What other explanation could there be? She touched her belly gently, feeling the flutter of movement beneath her palm. Despite everything, despite the circumstances of conception she believed had occurred, she loved this child. That was the secret she carried alongside the shame. No matter who had sired this baby, no matter what monster's blood ran in those tiny veins, she would protect them with her last breath. A knock at the door made her stiffen. The tavern keeper's wife, probably, come to remind her again that a pregnant Omega without a pack was bad for business. The woman had given her until week's end to find somewhere else to stay. "Coming," Cordelia called, wrapping herself in a shawl before opening the door. But it was not the tavern keeper's wife. It was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, with the round face of a human child, rather than the sharp features of wolf kind. He pressed a folded note into her hand and fled before she could question him. The paper was cheap, the ink smeared from the rain, but the words were clear enough. Thornwood men in village, asking about pregnant Omega. Get out now. A friend who remembers your kindness. Cordelia's blood turned to ice in her veins. The note must have come from Marta, the cook's daughter she had once helped escape a beating. But there was no time to dwell on her unlikely savior, Roderick, her former mate, the alpha who had cast her out in public disgrace, calling her adulteress and traitor before their entire pack. She had thought exile was punishment enough for her supposed crimes. She had thought he would be content to let her disappear, to fade away into obscurity where she could no longer embarrass him. Apparently, she had been wrong. She moved quickly, though her pregnant body made nothing quick anymore. A small bag with her few possessions, she had learned to travel light in the months since her exile. Her warmest cloak, though it was worn thin from use. The handful of coins she had saved from her net-mending work, enough to buy perhaps a week of food if she was careful. The back stairs, rarely used and creaking with age. The alley behind the tavern, thick with the smell of rotting fish and desperation. The road that led to the forest, her only hope of escape. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, but the sky remained dark with clouds that promised more. Cordelia walked as fast as she dared, one hand protectively cradling her belly, the other clutching her cloak closed against the cold. Behind her she heard the sound she had been dreading, hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming closer. She ducked into an alley between two fishing sheds and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked, as if sensing her fear, and she pressed her palm harder against her belly in silent reassurance. The riders passed so close she could smell the wet leather of their tack. 4 of them, bearing the silver and green colors of Thornwood Pack. Roderick's men, just as the note had warned. One of them spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the rain-washed air. The tavern keeper said she was here a week ago. Cannot have gone far, not in her condition. Another laughed, an ugly sound that scraped against her nerves. Lord Roderick wants her found before Blackthorn's men do, says the Western King has been asking questions, sending investigators. If she talks to them, tells them her side of things. The first guard grunted. Then we make sure she does not talk to anyone. Lord Roderick was clear about that. Cordelia pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Not just pursuit. They meant to silence her permanently. And Darius Blackthorn, the man she believed had violated her, was investigating? None of this made sense. She waited until the hoofbeats faded, then slipped from the alley and ran, as best she could run with 8 months of pregnancy weighing her down toward the forest edge. The trees were her only chance. If she could lose herself in the woods, find another village, perhaps change her name and start again? A hand grabbed her cloak from behind. She spun, or tried to, her balance thrown off by her belly. The guard who had caught her was young, barely more than a boy himself, but his grip was iron and his eyes were cold with the certainty of someone following orders without question. "Found you," he said almost gleefully. "Lord Roderick will be pleased." He threw her to the ground. Cordelia curled around her belly as she fell, instinct overriding everything else. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, mud soaking through her dress and into her skin, but she felt the baby move, still safe, still protected. Her wolf snarled inside her, desperate to shift and fight, but the pregnancy made transformation impossible. She was helpless, vulnerable, everything she had sworn she would never be again. The guard raised his hand, and she braced for the blow. It never came. A massive wolf, black as midnight and larger than any she had ever seen, burst from the forest edge and took the guard's throat in its jaws. Blood sprayed hot across Cordelia's face as the man fell, dead before he hit the ground. More wolves emerged from the trees, 6, 8, 10 of them, all bearing colors that made her heart stop, black and silver, the mark of the Western Territories. Darius Blackthorn's pack. The other Thornwood guards came running at the commotion, swords drawn, but they were hopelessly outmatched. The Western wolves cut through them with brutal efficiency, movements coordinated like dancers who had practiced this choreography 1,000 times. In moments, all 4 lay dead in the muddy street, and the village around them had gone deathly silent. The massive black wolf, the one who had killed the first guard, turned toward Cordelia. She scrabbled backward, terror choking her, until her back hit the wall of a building and there was nowhere else to go. Then the wolf shifted. The man who stood before her was tall and powerfully built, with black hair plastered to his skull by the rain and ice-blue eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. A thin scar curved from his left eyebrow to his temple, a pale line against his tanned skin. His features were harsh rather than handsome, all sharp angles and a jaw set like stone, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. Darius Blackthorn, the brutal king, the monster who had supposedly violated her. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. His expression was unreadable, neither threatening nor particularly welcoming, simply watchful. "You are Cordelia Ashford," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, rougher, like gravel wrapped in velvet. I have been looking for you. Word reached my court that Thornwood was spreading claims about me, saying I violated the Alpha's mate. I do not take kindly to lies told in my name. I came to find the truth. She should have been terrified. She should have screamed, should have fought, should have done anything except take the hand of the man she believed had ruined her life. But when their eyes met, her world tilted. A sensation shifted in her chest, clicked into place like a key finding its lock. Her wolf, agitated for so long, suddenly surged forward with recognition so fierce it stole her breath. And in Darius Blackthorn's cold blue eyes, she saw the same shock, the same impossible recognition. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the cold rain, calloused from what must have been years of sword work. He pulled her gently to her feet, and when she stood before him, barely reaching his shoulder, she felt a stirring she had not felt in nearly a year. Hope. The journey to the hunting lodge took 2 days, during which Cordelia learned several things that challenged everything she thought she knew. First, that Darius Blackthorn was not the monster Roderick had painted him to be. He was stern, certainly, and his warriors treated him with the kind of respect born from genuine fear of his power. But he was also careful with her in ways that surprised her, ensuring she had the best horse in the company, the warmest blankets when they made camp, the first share of food at every meal. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were direct and without cruelty. Second, that he insisted, calmly and repeatedly, that he had never seen her before the moment he saved her life. That during the time she claimed to have been violated by him, he had been 300 miles away, dealing with a border dispute that had required his presence for weeks. That he had witnesses, documents, an unbroken chain of proof that he could not have been in her village that night. Third, and most disturbing, was the feeling that persisted between them. Every time their eyes met, an electric current passed through her. Every time his hand accidentally brushed hers when he helped her mount her horse, her wolf keened with a recognition she could not explain. She should have hated him, should have recoiled from his presence, but instead she found herself drawn to him in ways that made no sense given what she believed he had done. They arrived at the lodge as evening fell on the second day, a sturdy wooden structure in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines that creaked in the winter wind. Guards stood at every entrance, efficient and alert, and servants moved quickly to prepare rooms and food. It was clearly a royal establishment, comfortable without being ostentatious, and Cordelia found herself assigned to a guest chamber rather than a cell. The room was warm, with a fire already crackling in the hearth, and a bed larger than any she had slept in during her months of exile. She stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. That evening, Darius came to her door. He stood in the doorway like a man uncertain of his welcome, this powerful king who could command armies with a word. She noticed details she had missed before. The silver threading through his black hair at the temples, the way his hands stayed carefully at his sides as if he did not trust himself to gesture, the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "We need to talk," he said, "about what you believe happened to you." "What I believe happened?" Cordelia heard her own voice sharpen with defensive anger. "A man in your colors came to my room while my mate was away. He drugged my wine. She could not finish the sentence. The memories were too fragmented, too obscured by whatever magic had been worked on her that night. Darius stepped into the room, his presence filling the space in ways that had nothing to do with his physical size. "Describe him to me. Everything you remember." "I told you I do not remember clearly. He wore a mask. And the wine. There was a drug in the wine." "But you are certain it was me." Roderick said. She stopped, hearing how weak that sounded. There were others who saw a man in Western colors near my village that night. Roderick investigated, and all the evidence pointed to you. Roderick investigated. Darius's voice was flat, devoid of inflection in a way that somehow conveyed more skepticism than any outburst could have. Your mate, the man who stood to lose everything if the truth were different than the story he told you. What are you suggesting? He paced to the window and back, a caged wolf in human form, his movements tight with restrained energy. I am not suggesting anything yet. I am pointing out that everything you know about that night came from a man who might have had reason to lie. Cordelia's hands went to her belly, cradling the child within. The baby kicked against her palm, strong and insistent, and she felt a surge of protective love that transcended everything else. Why would Roderick lie about this? The pregnancy shamed him as much as it shamed me. He lost his betrothed because of the scandal. Did he? Darius's eyes sharpened. My investigators have been busy these past weeks. Lady Vivian Ashcroft did break their engagement, yes. But she broke it before your exile, not after. And she broke it because she discovered information about Roderick that disturbed her. She has been trying to expose him ever since, but no one would listen to a spurned woman without the victim to corroborate her claims. The room seemed to tilt. Cordelia gripped the bedpost to steady herself. That cannot be true. Roderick told me. Roderick told you many things. How many of them can you verify independently? Darius moved closer, close enough that she could smell him. Leather and steel and pine, nothing like the cedar and ink that haunted her fragmented memories. The contrast struck her like a physical blow. Tomorrow I will take you to my castle, he continued, where an elder can read magical signatures. If someone used dark magic on you that night, she will be able to trace it, and the signature of any power that has touched your child. Cordelia's breath caught. You can prove who the father is? I can prove who the father is not. His jaw tightened. And I am eager to be cleared of a crime I did not commit. For the first time since she had been exiled, Cordelia felt the weight on her chest lighten slightly. She had assumed she would never know the truth, that the fragmented memories and Roderick's accusations were all she would ever have. But if there was a way to see through the lies... I will go with you, she said. I want answers too. Darius nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than triumph. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight. The feeling between us, he said quietly, not looking at her. When we touched, you felt it too. It was not a question. Cordelia did not answer anyway, because she did not know what answer would be true. I do not understand it either, Darius continued, but I intend to find out what it means, along with everything else. He left before she could respond, and Cordelia sat alone in the firelight, one hand on her belly and her mind full of questions that would not stop multiplying. The castle rose from the cliffs like something carved by giants, gray stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and sea spray. Cordelia stared up at it as they approached the following afternoon, her heart caught somewhere between awe and terror. This was Darius Blackthorn's seat of power, the heart of the Western Territories, and she was entering it as his guest. The Great Hall was no less impressive inside than out, with soaring ceilings and tapestries depicting hunts and battles that stretched back generations. Wolves in both forms moved through the space with purpose, all of them pausing to watch as their king entered, with a pregnant Omega at his side. Darius guided her through the stairs and whispers with a hand at the small of her back, his touch light but reassuring. He gave orders to servants, arranged for her to be housed in the wing reserved for honored guests, and ignored the raised eyebrows of his advisors with the ease of long practice. Rest tonight, he told her before leaving to attend to matters of state. Tomorrow, we will visit Elder Miriam, and we will begin to find answers. The guest chambers were grander than anything Cordelia had known even during her time as Roderick's mate. She bathed in heated water, ate food prepared with spices she could not name, and slept in a bed so soft she felt she might sink through it entirely. But her dreams were troubled, fragments of that night surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. The masked man, the bitter taste of drugged wine, and beneath it all, the truth her conscious mind refused to acknowledge. Cedar and ink, that familiar scent again, belonging to someone she knew. The wolf within her had recognized it all along. The next morning, Cordelia stood in the chamber of Elder Miriam, the bond keeper of the Western Territories, and began to learn that everything she had believed was a lie. The room was circular, filled with incense smoke and ancient symbols painted on walls that had seen centuries of ritual. Candles burned in holders shaped like wolves, casting flickering shadows across surfaces worn smooth by generations of seekers. Miriam herself was ancient, small and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as blades, and her hands steady when she performed the bond-reading rituals. Cordelia lay on a padded table, her belly bared for the examination, while Darius stood in the corner with his arms crossed and his face carefully neutral. "The child's signature is clear," Elder Miriam said, her voice cracked with age but firm with authority. "Strong wolf blood, well-formed, healthy. But the father—" She paused, her brow furrowing deeply. "This is unusual." "Unusual how?" Cordelia's voice came out barely above a whisper. "The father's signature has been deliberately obscured by dark magic, layered carefully and with considerable skill. However, every magical obscurement has gaps, seams where the true signature bleeds through." The elder's weathered eyes met Cordelia's gray ones. "What I can see through those gaps does not match King Darius. The underlying signature is entirely different in character. Whatever else the truth may be, your child was not sired by the man standing in this room." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She heard Darius exhale sharply, felt the tension that had been holding his body rigid finally release. Not Darius. All this time, the shame she had carried, the belief that she carried the seed of a monster. And it had been a lie. "Then who?" she demanded, pushing herself up on her elbows despite the elder's protests. "If not him, then who?" "To answer that, I must attempt to remove the obscurement entirely. It will take time and concentration." Elder Miriam's hands continued their movements above Cordelia's belly. "But I recognize the style of this working. There is only one witch in this region who weaves magic in this particular pattern. Helena Marsh, banished from the Eastern Pax for practicing forbidden arts." "I know that name." Cordelia sat up fully, her heart racing. "She lived near our village. Roderick consulted her often. He said it was for healing remedies, for help with pack politics." Elder Miriam's expression grew grave. "Helena Marsh does not deal in healing. Her specialty is manipulation of bonds and memories. If Lord Roderick was consulting with her regularly, it was not for remedies." The silence that fell was heavy with implication. "There is more," the elder continued carefully. "I am sensing traces of old magic on you, child. Not from the night you describe, but from years before. A working design to create false attraction, to simulate the feeling of a mate bond where none truly exists." Cordelia felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that your bond with Lord Roderick may not have been natural. I will need to examine you more thoroughly, and I will need 3 days to prepare the ritual that might restore your memories. But I suspect the truth is far darker than simple violation." 3 days later, Cordelia returned to the elder's chamber, ready to face the truth. The pain was immediate and intense, like shards of glass working their way through her mind. Memories surfaced in fragments, sharp-edged and bloody. The night that had destroyed her life, playing back in pieces that no longer matched the story she had been told. A man wearing black and silver, Darius's colors. Yes. But his movements were familiar. The way he walked, the angle of his shoulders, the particular tilt of his head when he listened. Things she had seen 1,000 times before during their 3 years together. The colors were a costume, a disguise, but the man beneath them, his voice, wrong somehow, muffled perhaps by magic, but beneath the disguise, cedar and ink, the scent that had surrounded her for the entire duration of her time with Roderick. A smell she would know anywhere, even drugged, even with her memories clouded. The mask slipped just for a moment in a fragment of memory she had never been able to access before. Hazel eyes crinkled with cruel amusement, features she knew as well as her own reflection. Roderick. The scream that tore from Cordelia's throat was not entirely human. Her wolf surged forward, raging against the impossible truth, and she would have shifted if Darius had not been there instantly, catching her as she collapsed off the table, his arms strong around her as the truth crashed over her in waves. Her mate, her promised protector, the man who had stood before their pack and called her faithless, who had condemned her to exile for a crime she did not commit. He had come to her that night disguised as his enemy, had used magic to cloud her mind and her memory, and then blamed her for the violation. But why? The question burned through her grief. Why would he do this? Elder Miriam's voice cut through her anguish. I have removed the obscurement from the child's signature. The father is indeed Lord Roderick of Thornwood, and I have confirmed what I suspected about the false bond. 3 years ago, Helena Marsh was paid to create an artificial attraction between you and Lord Roderick, one that would mimic a true mate bond closely enough to fool you, but weak enough to be severed when convenient. But why? Cordelia gasped out. Why target me? Why any of this? I may be able to answer that. Elder Miriam's voice was gentle but firm. Your mother was Alara Ashford, was she not? Of the Silver Creek Ashfords? Cordelia nodded, confused by the apparent change of subject. She died when I was young. I barely remember her. The Silver Creek line carries ancient blood, strong Omega lineage, prized for breeding powerful heirs. And there is a prophecy, old and mostly forgotten, that speaks of a Silver Creek Omega who would be the true mate of a great Western king. The elder's eyes moved to Darius, still holding Cordelia in his arms. I suspect Lord Roderick knew of this prophecy. He used magic to intercept the true bond before it could form, claimed you for himself to prevent the alliance, and planned to breed his own heirs from your bloodline. Cordelia's mind reeled. Then the pregnancy. He needed an heir from your bloodline, but he could not have one officially without binding himself to you permanently. His arrangement with Lady Vivian Ashcroft promised far more political power than an Omega seamstress could offer. So he devised a scheme. Get you pregnant, but make it appear to be another man's crime. Cast you out in disgrace, claim the child later, once you were dead, and raise it as a rescued orphan with no mother to complicate matters. That is why he is hunting me now, Cordelia whispered. Not to prevent me from talking, but to claim the child. And to ensure you cannot interfere with his plans, Darius said grimly. Dead women tell no tales and make no claims. I have you, he added, his voice rough but gentle against her hair. I have you, Cordelia. Breathe. She could not breathe. She could barely think. The world she had built around her shame was collapsing, and she did not know what would be left when the rubble cleared. But she felt Darius's arms around her, felt the warmth of him, felt her wolf settling despite everything because this was where she was supposed to be. Not with Roderick, who had used her and discarded her like a broken tool. With this man, this supposed monster, who had never been anything but honest with her since the moment they met. The attraction I felt with Roderick, she said slowly, pieces falling into place. It was always muted, always incomplete. He told me that was normal. that the stories of overwhelming mate bonds were exaggerated. He lied about that too, Darius said. A true mate bond cannot be muted or incomplete. What you felt with him was manufactured. What you feel with me? He paused, and she heard the vulnerability beneath his careful control. That overwhelming recognition is the true bond, the one Roderick's magic was designed to prevent. Cordelia looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Her true mate, the one who had been meant for her all along. He stole years from us, she whispered. He stole everything from you. Darius's voice was deadly calm, and he will answer for it. Elder Miriam spoke again, her voice cold and certain as steel. Creating a false mate bond through magic, then discarding the victim, is one of the highest crimes under the old laws. Combined with the conspiracy to murder, the use of forbidden magic, and the false accusations against a sovereign king, Lord Roderick will face consequences far beyond mere scandal. But to convict him, we will need more than magical testimony. We will need physical evidence and witnesses. We have both, Darius said. Lady Vivian has been gathering evidence for months, and my agents captured Helena Marsh 2 days ago, trying to flee across the northern border. She will testify. Why do you care? Cordelia asked him later when the worst of the shock had passed, and she lay in her chambers with him sitting vigil at her bedside. Night had fallen outside the windows, stars visible between scudding clouds. You barely know me. Why does any of this matter to you? Darius was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp in the candlelight. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. Because I know what it is to be blamed for a crime I did not commit. I know what it is to carry a reputation built on lies, while the truth remains buried. Your reputation? She said softly. The stories about you killing your father. His jaw clenched hard enough that she could see the muscle jump. I did kill my father, but not for the reasons people believe. He told her then, in sparse and halting words, about his mother's suffering, about the decades of abuse that no one in the pack would acknowledge, the bruises hidden beneath gowns, the terror in her eyes that everyone pretended not to see. About the night his father's cruelty had finally gone too far, and Darius had done what needed to be done to protect the woman who had given him life. She begged me not to tell anyone the truth, he said. She wanted to keep her dignity, even in death. So I let them call me Monster instead. Cordelia reached out and covered his hand with hers where it rested on the blanket. The connection between them hummed at the contact, no longer confusing but clarifying. She understood now why she had felt drawn to him from the first moment they touched. Her wolf had known, even when her mind could not see past the lies she had been fed. We are the same, you and I, she said quietly, both victims of someone else's story. His fingers intertwined with hers. We do not have to stay that way. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation. Darius's agents worked tirelessly, coordinating with Lady Vivian's network of informants. With the baby due within the month, time pressed against them, but Darius refused to let Cordelia face the council heavily pregnant and exhausted. Lady Vivian Ashcroft arrived at the castle one cold afternoon, elegant and sharp-eyed, bearing documents she had kept hidden for nearly a year. I knew what he was within weeks of our engagement, she told Cordelia over tea in the private sitting room. Roderick spoke of you with such contempt, but there was fear beneath it. When I found correspondence between him and Helena Marsh, I realized the depth of his deception. I broke the engagement immediately, but no one believed you. No one wanted to believe me. Vivian's expression hardened. I went to my father, to the pack elders. They told me I must be mistaken, that Lord Roderick was a respected alpha with no history of such behavior. The letters alone were not enough, they said. Roderick claimed they were forgeries, And without the victim herself to corroborate, without magical proof of the false bond, my word was merely that of a scorned woman. But you kept the evidence. I kept everything, and I kept searching for more. A cold smile crossed Vivienne's face. I knew someday the truth would come out. I just needed to be ready when it did. When I heard that King Darius was investigating the claims against him, I reached out immediately. Your testimony, combined with Elder Miriam's magical findings and Helena Marsh's confession, transforms my documents from alleged forgeries into corroborating evidence. The alliance between them formed quickly, two women united by their determination to see Roderick brought to justice. Through it all, the growing bond between Cordelia and Darius continued to strengthen. He never pressured her, never demanded more than she was ready to give, but she felt his presence like a constant warmth at her side. When the baby kept her awake with kicking and discomfort, he would read to her until she fell asleep. When anxiety about the coming trial made her pace the halls at night, he would walk beside her, matching his stride to hers. One evening, Darius visited her chambers as he did each night. The baby had been particularly active all day, somersaulting and kicking in ways that made Cordelia gasp and laugh. "She is restless tonight," she said, pressing a hand against the spot where a tiny foot was currently jabbing her ribs. "She?" Darius looked up from the correspondence he had been reading. "I do not know for certain, but I have started thinking of the baby that way." She shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that did not feel like being attacked from within. "Would you like to feel?" The question surprised them both. Darius set aside his papers, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the hunger beneath the mask. He had been so careful not to touch her unnecessarily since their arrival, maintaining a respectful distance that she had appreciated at first, but now found herself wanting to breach. He moved to kneel beside her chair, his large hands hovering over her belly without quite touching. "May I?" She took his hand and pressed it against her, right where the baby was currently performing acrobatics. For a moment, nothing. Then a strong kick directly into his palm, and Darius's face transformed with wonder. "Strong," he whispered. "She is strong." "She will need to be," Cordelia said, "with the family she is being born into." His eyes met hers, and the weight of that statement hung between them. Family. As if they had already decided that was what they would become. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility, until a knock at the door shattered it. Darius pulled back, his expression closing off as he called for the visitor to enter. It was his beta, Theron, with news that could not wait. One of their scouts had intercepted a messenger from Thornwood Pack. Roderick was demanding Cordelia's return, claiming rights over his property and the child she carried. The word made Cordelia's blood run cold, but Darius's response made it boil again with a different kind of heat. "Tell Lord Roderick," Darius said, his voice soft and deadly, "that if he wants her, he can come to my castle and try to take her himself. I will be waiting." With Helena Marsh's testimony secured and the evidence compiled, Darius petitioned the Council of Alphas for an emergency hearing before the baby arrived. The night before they were scheduled to depart for the council, Cordelia found Darius on the battlements, staring out at the moonlit sea. She joined him without speaking, and they stood in companionable silence until the cold drove them back inside. "I am afraid," she admitted as they walked through the corridors. "Not of the trial itself, but of what comes after. Win or lose, my life will never be what I once imagined it would be." Darius stopped, turning to face her. The torchlight cast shadows across his scarred features, making him look both dangerous and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "What did you imagine your life would be?" he asked. "Simple. A mate who loved me, children, a home where I belonged." She laughed bitterly. "Foolish dreams for someone like me." "They are not foolish." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "They are beautiful dreams." and if you will let me, I would like to help you make them real." She should have hesitated, should have protected herself, guarded the heart that had already been broken once. But when she looked into his blue eyes, she saw only truth, only love. "Yes," she whispered, "I would like that very much." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, a promise rather than a demand. And when they finally parted, both breathing hard, she felt what she had never expected to feel again: hope. 2 days later, Cordelia stood in the grand assembly hall of the Council of Alphas and told her truth to the highest authorities of their world. The hall was vast, designed to intimidate, with pillars of black stone rising toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Hundreds of wolves filled the gallery, alphas and their entourages from every territory, all gathered to witness the trial of Lord Roderick of Thornwood. The accused stood between guards on the opposite side of the hall, and even from this distance, Cordelia could see the fear beneath his mask of wounded dignity. Lady Vivian Ashcroft presented her evidence first: the correspondence between Roderick and Helena Marsh, the payments for dark magic carefully disguised as charitable donations, the timeline of the conspiracy stretching back 3 years to the day Roderick first approached Helena about creating the false bond. Then Helena Marsh herself was brought forward, bound by magical compulsion that prevented lies. She confessed everything in a flat, affectless voice: how Roderick had paid her to create the artificial attraction, how she had obscured his signature when he impregnated Cordelia, how she had clouded the victim's memories and made her believe the attack came from a stranger in Western colors. "He wanted the child, but not the mother," Helena said. "An heir with Silver Creek blood, raised without the complications of a living parent who might make claims. He planned to kill her once the baby was born and take the child as a rescued orphan." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Several alphas rose from their seats in outrage. Finally, Cordelia stood before the assembly, one hand resting on her swollen belly, and spoke without shame for the first time in nearly a year. "I was deceived from the beginning," she said, her voice carrying through the vast hall. "The bond I believed was real was manufactured by magic. The violation I believed came from a stranger was committed by my own mate. He planted his child in my womb, blamed me for the pregnancy, and cast me out to die. He would have killed me to claim this child if King Darius had not found me first." She turned to look at Roderick, meeting his hazel eyes without flinching. "I believed for months that I was the mother of a monster's spawn, but the only monster was the man I trusted with my life." "Lies!" Roderick shouted, his composure finally cracking. "She is lying to protect her lover, the so-called king who—" Silence. The head of the council, an ancient alpha with silver hair and eyes that had seen centuries, did not raise his voice. But Roderick fell quiet anyway. "The witch, Helena Marsh, has confessed under magical truth compulsion. Lady Vivian's documents have been verified as authentic. Elder Miriam of the Western Territories has provided magical testimony confirming both the false bond and the true paternity. The evidence of your conspiracy is overwhelming." The judgment, when it came, was swift and absolute. Roderick was stripped of his alpha status, his properties seized, his pack left to choose new leadership. He was not merely exiled, but condemned to the silver mines, where criminals worked until death claimed them. Cordelia watched as he was dragged from the hall, screaming threats and curses that fell on deaf ears. She thought she would feel triumph, or at least satisfaction, watching the man who had destroyed her life finally face consequences. But she felt only exhaustion, and beneath that, the first fragile stirrings of peace. Darius found her afterward, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the snow-covered courtyard. "It is over," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Is it?" She watched her breath fog in the cold air. "I am vindicated, yes, but I still must rebuild everything from nothing." not from nothing. His hand found hers, the true mate bond between them flaring with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. You have never been alone, not since the moment I found you in that village. My wolf knew you before my mind did. You are my mate, Cordelia, the one who is always meant to be mine. She turned to face him, searching his eyes for any sign of obligation or political calculation. She found only sincerity, and something deeper. I will not be your mate out of gratitude, she said. I will not trade one cage for another. Then do not. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. Be my mate because you choose it, because you want me as I want you. The bond gives us a starting point, but what we build from there is up to us. Cordelia looked at this man who had saved her life, defended her honor, and shown her more kindness in weeks than Roderick had in years. Her wolf sang in her chest, certain and joyful. Her heart, slower to trust, was beginning to echo that song. Ask me properly, she said. Darius smiled then, a real smile that transformed his harsh features. He dropped to one knee before her, there on the balcony with snow beginning to fall around them. Cordelia Ashford, survivor of betrayal, mother of the child who brought you to me, would you do me the honor of becoming my mate? Not because fate demands it, but because you choose it? She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, soft at first and then deeper, letting the bond between them finally seal into a permanent truth. When they broke apart, both breathless, her answer was already written in the way she held him. Yes, she said anyway, because he deserved to hear it. Yes, I choose you. The baby kicked hard enough for them both to feel it, and Darius laughed against her lips, one hand coming to rest on the swell of her belly. I think our daughter approves, he said. Cordelia smiled at the word our, at the easy way he claimed a child that was not his by blood, but would be his in every way that mattered. Our daughter, she repeated, and let herself finally believe in the future stretching before them. 2 weeks later, the baby came on the first day of spring. The labor started before dawn, slow contractions that Cordelia had dismissed as false alarms, until they sharpened into demands that could not be ignored. The midwife was called, and the healer, and half the castle staff who seemed to materialize out of nowhere with towels and hot water and herbs that made the air smell of flowers and earth. Darius arrived at her chambers before anyone thought to send for him, drawn by the bond that connected them more strongly than any message could. He burst through the door looking wild-eyed and terrified, this man who had faced armies without flinching, reduced to helpless anxiety by the prospect of his mate in pain. I am not leaving, he announced before anyone could suggest it. The midwife, a practical woman with gray braids and no patience for male foolishness, pointed to a chair by the bed. Then sit there, hold her hand, and stay out of my way. He obeyed without argument. The hours that followed were the longest of Cordelia's life. Pain built in waves, each one worse than the last, until she thought she might shatter from the force of it. But through it all, Darius's hand remained steady in hers, an anchor to the world outside the storm consuming her body. She squeezed his fingers hard enough to bruise when the contractions peaked, and he never complained, never pulled away. He had faced armies, survived assassination attempts, killed his own father to protect someone he loved. Holding his mate's hand while she brought their daughter into the world was the easiest fight he had ever undertaken. Almost there, the midwife encouraged as the sun climbed toward noon. One more push, my lady. Give me one more. Cordelia gathered what remained of her strength and pushed with everything she had. The cry that filled the room was thin but strong, the unmistakable sound of new life announcing itself to the world. Cordelia collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as the midwife cleaned and wrapped the tiny form. A girl, the midwife said, placing the baby in Cordelia's arms. A perfect, healthy girl. The baby was tiny and red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, with a tuft of dark hair and gray eyes that were entirely her mother's. Cordelia held her against her chest and wept with a joy she had never expected to feel. Darius leaned close, one arm around Cordelia's shoulders, his other hand reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "What will you name her?" he asked, brushing hair from Cordelia's sweat-soaked forehead. "Rose," Cordelia said without hesitation, "for new beginnings after long winters." Darius pressed a kiss to his mate's temple, then another to his daughter's downy head. Rose Blackthorn, Princess of the Western Territories, daughter of survivors, child of love that refused to be denied. In the weeks that followed, Cordelia learned what it meant to be loved without conditions. Darius doted on Rose with a devotion that defied every rumor about the brutal king, rising in the night to comfort her when she cried, singing lullabies in a voice rough from disuse, holding her for hours while she slept against his chest. He looked at their daughter the way he looked at Cordelia, with wonder, with gratitude, with fierce protectiveness. Their mating ceremony was held at midsummer, in the garden of the castle where the roses had begun to bloom in abundance. Wolves came from every territory to witness the union of the Alpha King and the Omega, who had survived betrayal to find her true mate. The ceremony itself was simple, as Cordelia had requested, focused not on spectacle, but on the vows they spoke to each other. Lady Vivian stood as witness for Cordelia, and Theron for Darius, and Rose slept through the entire ceremony in Elder Miriam's arms. As Cordelia spoke her vows, as Darius placed the mating mark on her throat, and she placed hers on his, she thought about all the paths that had led her to this moment. The pain and the shame and the months of exile had been terrible to endure, but without them, she would never have found her true family, would never have known what real love felt like. In the garden of the castle, the roses climbed the ancient stone walls, a reminder that beauty could flourish even in the harshest of places. Cordelia looked at her daughter, at her mate, at the life she had built from the ashes of betrayal, and finally let herself breathe without fear. She was home.